Ja, hallo, Kurt hier.
Hi Kurt, how's it going?
Ja, sehr gut, danke. Und dir?
Yeah, pretty well thanks, and thanks so much for sending over those German manuals and books. Those accuracy figures are very, very interesting.
Gern geschehen. Was kann ich für dich tun?
Well, you see, it's like this. There's going to be quite a lot of variaboo when I put all these out there, so I thought that,
Ja.
well, given that you're German, it might be better for you to present and explain them.
Warum genau?
Because I'll just be accused of bias or something like normal. I mean, like transcribing them wrong or fakery, I mean, being British and all that. I mean, this German script can be kind of hard going at times.
Und warum ist das mein Problem?
I just thought they'd take it better from a German.
Und das denkt der Dieter schon. Ach, aber ich bin nicht deine Sockenpuppe. Du bist selber in dieses Problem gelaufen und jetzt probierst du dies an mir zu übertragen? Nein, habe schon genug Probleme im Leben.
Oh? Gut. Komm zu mir.
Tut mir leid, kann ich weiterreden? Der Dieter ruft mich wieder. Das ist schon das 5. Mal heute.
Oh, sorry, I better let you go then. But your wife? Good luck, I guess.
Ja, good luck. Auf jeden Fall. Bis später. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
I wonder if his lockdown beard is quite so terrible as mine. Anyway, let's do this thing. So hello and welcome to a particularly nerdy and figure-filled episode of Bloke on the Range. Now, what Kurt sent me was 2 German manuals. We've got the 1909 Schiessvorschrift, so this is the Imperial German equivalent of the musketry regulations 1909, same year, ironically. We've got a pre-World War II version, 1934, with some updates stuck in it. And what we've also got is Backbone of the Wehrmacht, the German K98K rifle by Richard D. Law, collector grade publications, because this has got some testing protocols in it that we will get onto at some point. Now, the way I'm going to do this is basically look at some of the figures. What I've done is I've tabled them up. And this table, which you'll see more closely in a minute, is online. There's a link to it in the description below, so you can have a look yourself. So, these are quite interesting little manuals. I mean, they start out with sort of basic external ballistics, theory of a group, that sort of thing. But what really interests us today is there's a couple of accuracy tables like this. And before people start tapping away, I'm using accuracy in the textbook of small arms and colloquial meaning as a group size. So I will keep using that. I'm not one of these hair splitters of accuracy versus precision, because you can find academic publications, military publications that use it both ways. So we're just sticking with accuracy. Now we'll start with the 1909 ones because these are more understandable to the modern public. Once we start talking about that manual, we need to start talking about other ways of measuring groups than what is usually done. The first thing that we need to know before we get to the table is that they allow flyers to be discounted. So, over to the first table. So this table is marked dispersion of the weapon, and it specifies underneath, and this is important, that the figures represent average values with new rifles, or shot with new rifles. It cannot be required that every individual rifle at all distances corresponds to these dispersion limits. So we know we're not talking about a minimum standard or maximum group size. This is an average for new rifles, and it's nice that they actually pointed that out. So the way these are expressed is Hohenstreuung and Breitenstreuung. So vertical dispersion and horizontal dispersion. And I think it's probably best if we move over to the transcription now. So I'm not going to talk through the figures, but what I've done, and we know it's a Gewehr 98 by the way, not a Gewehr 88, is I converted them into minutes of angle. Now, what I've done is I've taken the vertical figure and converted that into minutes of angle. And for information, it's 2.9 centimeters per 100 yards, per 100 meters, sorry, mixing units. And the reason why we're not taking the diagonal is that groups are actually oval. We don't tend to see that in modern times with modern ammunition. We tend to think of them as circular. So all of the conversions I've done into minutes of angle have been done to circular minute of angle groups, Mauer groups. Basically, because they're oval, the corners are basically not used. So we ignore them, we just take the height. And the reason why groups are actually more stretched vertically than horizontally is that there's more influences on the vertical dispersion than the horizontal dispersion. So, for instance, variations in the power of the charge, or indeed of the primer, will have a greater effect vertically because it'll change the velocity than horizontally. And this is actually something that's explained in British manuals as well. But today we are just using German. And what's also interesting is that there's a version of this online on archive.org where it's been hand annotated, and it's difficult to see in the printout, and I've tried to clear it up with a bit of basic processing, but I'll put a link to it. But what's gone a bit fuzzy here is actually, it says Gewehr Karabiner 98. So we've actually got hand annotated the figures for a Kar 98A, or AZ, added by an Unteroffizier or an officer under there. So I've tabulated these figures out as well. And just as an example, 100 meters, an average factory new Gewehr 98 is producing 3.1 Mauer, Kar 98A 4.5, 300 meters, we're up to 3.9 for an average factory new Gewehr 98, 4.9 for the Karabiner, and then let's take it all up to 1,000. 7.2 Mauer for the rifle, 8.2 for the carbine. And yeah, so that's interesting. That should clear up a few things. So moving on to the immediate pre-World War II era now, we have this Schiessvorschrift, and in which we have this table, which is a little different because now we are using 50% dispersion of the heavy pointy bullet in centimeters with Gewehr 98, Kar 98B and LMG, which at this time is still MG 08/15 and the MG 15 in single shot. Now, there's a little precision underneath which says that the 50% dispersion of the heavy ball bullet with the out of the Kar 98K is only insignificantly larger. So we can see that the Kar 98K is a vast improvement over the Kar 98A, which is probably the stocking up. It doesn't have that heavy nose cap on it. Now, what do we actually mean by 50% dispersion? And what's quite helpful is that this book provides an explanation. So I printed this out, and I actually scaled it on the photocopier so that this radius figure corresponds to the 100 meter radius figure in the table. So we've got our oval shaped group again, and the 100% dispersion is from there to there vertically, from there to there horizontally. And what the Germans liked to do, and the Swiss did this as well at the time, was take the middle half of the shots vertically. So they ignore the horizontal and they just start counting from one end, count from the other end, and draw lines at the point where 50% of the shots are between those two lines. They then do the same horizontally. So 50% of the shots lie between those lines. And that means that in that square there, you should have 25% of the shots, because you're taking 50 horizontal, 50 vertical, should give you 25%. But they also give radius. And I have actually had people in the comments who don't know that a radius is half a diameter. So it's the mean point of impact to a circle enclosing 50% of the shots. And what is interesting here is, because we think, okay, how are we going to convert that to something usable by modern thinking? And it says here, so basically a circle defined by this radius, so the 50% radius, includes the inner half of the shots. The circle with double the radius, approximately 94% of the shots. So basically what we can do is we can take the figures here, the radius figures, multiply them by 4, so radius to diameter is 2, and it said double the radius, so That makes it multiplied by 4, and that gives us the size of a 19 out of 20 shot group. And I've done this in the table. So we end up with, you could think of this as a 20 shot group with a flyer, with one flyer allowed. So at 100 meters, 4.1 mower, 300 meters, 4.6 mower, so that's a 40 centimeter group, and 500 is exactly 5 mower. So just to absolutely clear up what the numbers in that table represent, the details about the dispersions in table 3, which is that table, are average values from a large number of actual shooting results which have been obtained by excluding, as far as possible, bad influences. All the dispersion details can only represent a probability, no surety. They can thus never be used as fixed Vergleichszahlen, fixed comparison values. So there you go. It's not the minimum, it is the average. And given the comparison with the other table, that these are worse than the figures from this table. So I presume that it's in service. I mean, because when we're saying that, say at 300, Gewehr 98 is getting 3.9 mower on a total group, here we're saying at 300 it's 4.6. So it's worse. We know these are factory new rifles, so these are probably in service. Now I haven't got figures for a factory acceptance standard around the World War I time, but what I do have in this collector grade book is how they did the test, the Anschießen. For all the people who criticise my old video about shooting from a bench, guess what they did? They actually shot largely from a bench until they started using shooting machines more like that. So the way this worked is that at 100 meters they would put up a target like this, which has a couple of boxes on it, which we'll get to in a minute, and 5 rounds from each 98K were fired onto that at 100 meters, and some of these translations are slightly wonky and you'll have to go back into German to work out what they are, with no marking or observation between rounds. And then 3 of the 5 shots have to be in the 80 by 140 millimeter rectangle. And there's 2 rectangles here, one for brass cased ammunition and one for steel. If I remember rightly, the dotted one is 2 centimeters higher and is for steel cased ammunition, 80 millimeters wide, 140 millimeters high each, and that's to test the sighting. The Germans did not adjust the sights of their rifles to the individual soldier, so they had what in British or American terms would be a very, very loose interpretation of what a correct zero was, and soldiers just had to learn to hold off. And it's actually in the shooting exercises that they take a few practice shots to learn where to hold off. So 3 of the 5 shots had to go in there, so you could have like 1, 2, 3 and then 2 quite a way away. If that wasn't passed, the allowable adjustment was 0.2 millimeters laterally. There were not different heights of front sight, and you can see that they allow quite a lot vertically. And then back over here, all 5 shots have to be within a circle 120 millimeters in diameter. An evaluation of this dispersion is made with a cell-on disc. So that's a movable 120 millimeter disc. And if a bullet hole touched the rectangle at the outside, it was considered inside, and it's the same with the 120 millimeter disc. And they actually got 2 attempts at that. So if it failed the first time, and interestingly, this diagram is the second from a rifle. This rifle failed first time, and the second time shot a beautiful 5-round group. That's excellent. That's a very, very tight group. But previously, it was all over the place. So that works out at 2 attempts at a 4.4 minute of angle group. And interestingly, there's a note here. 71, when a team interrogated the Mauser personnel, apparently only 40% of the rifles passed first time. And if we ever get onto 98K snipers, talking about them, they actually had quite significant accuracy problems, and that's a large part of why. Now, this collector grade book also has some interesting details on the Kar-98K Japanese contract rifles, and the Mauser factory were actually supplying not only the Japanese but the Chinese during the 30s while they were fighting each other, which is something. So precision fire at 300 meters. Anytime the commission deems it necessary, it will also check the precision of a certain number of rifles of each allotment, i.e. up to 4% at 300 meters. There's some blah blah about where they have to fall for sighting. The juicy bit is over here. All 10 shots have to be within a rectangle measuring 48 centimeters high and 40 centimeters wide. So I've converted that to modern here. So our 10 round test has to have as a minimum standard 5.5 mower vertically, 4.6 mower horizontally. So we're talking in circular group terms a 5.5 mower group. So moving back to the pre-World War I period, we've actually got an interesting description of the annual accuracy test that they did on all rifles at the start of the shooting year immediately after the autumn cleaning, new rifles before their use, rifles which have just had a big overhaul, rifles which have just been overhauled because they had bad grouping, and it was done off the bench by people who were good shots, and they were supposed to avoid overtiring the shooters. So what this did was check both the sighting and the grouping, and to make this easier, what I've done is enlarge them, and they're on the PDF. So you'd aim at the bottom of the aiming mark there, with, for the Gewehr 98, the sight set on 400, and then all 3 shots had to land in the square, but must be no more than 20 centimeters apart. So 3-shot groups seen in the wild being used. So that's a 4.6 mower 3-shot group minimum for rifles in service when they were checked. And with the Kar-98A and AZ, they had to fall into, the 3 shots had to fall into this square, and then maximum 25 centimeters between them, so 5.75 mower 3-shot group. So finally, before we finish up, it doesn't belong in here because it's not German figures, but Richard Fisher of the Vickers Machine Gun Association in the UK was kind enough to send me minute 400 of the Small Arms Committee minutes, which describes a 1901 trial at Hythe with 2 Gewehr 98s. So this is in the round nose era still, and they fired 2 10-round groups out of each rifle at 500 yards to obtain the figure of merit, which is, well, mean radius. Just as a little note, this is basically median radius. Half the shots in, half the shots out. Mean radius is computing the radius of every single shot and dividing it by the number of shots. And they did that, and rifle 5245 had a figure of merit of 10.25 inches, which is 26 centimeters. So it's going to be similar but not quite identical to the 50% radius. And rifle 4044 had a figure of merit of 9.1. So there you go. If you survived this far, I've probably bored you to tears. Many thanks to Richard. Please consider becoming a patron or making a donation to the Vickers Machine Gun Association, because he does a lot of excellent documentary work, and I'm certainly going to use a lot of the Small Arms Committee minutes to make videos on various things that they tested back in the day, various things they found out. It's patrons, it's Bloke on the Range patrons that keep this channel chugging along, so if you haven't become one yet, please consider doing so. Maybe we'll upgrade from a fondue fork for a pointer one of these days. But anyway, thank you so much for watching so far, and see you again sometime. Bye.